Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Nagma. So viewers, we have two wonderful speakers from whom we can learn a lot, even though we have 30 minutes. As Nagma mentioned, they both represent foundations that do extensive work in education and come from very fairly different perspectives. As Nagma also mentioned, the Azim Premji Foundation, which works directly through its field offices and schools in rural districts across the country. So we'll be able to get a really on-ground perspective from Anurag. And on the other hand, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation really focuses on improving learning outcomes through its NGO partners. And I'd love to, hear from Geeta about how NGOs have been impacted by the crisis. We've heard already from students, a couple of students, a principal, and other practitioners in the sector. And it's now time for us to hear the perspective of foundations. So Geeta and Anurag, would love to hear from you. When lockdown was announced, what happened on the ground and what happened, as I was mentioning, Geeta, to the NGOs and through their eyes, what was it that they could see? Perhaps we can start with Geeta, and then Anurag would love to hear your perspectives on what you saw directly on the ground.
Thanks, Gayatri. Yes, when lockdown happened, what happened? I guess the world changed. That's the least. But really on the ground, from a school perspective or from a student perspective, I would really say I think within the first 2 or 3 weeks, three things were very apparent. First, of course, I think just the stress and anxiety of what's happened, within the first month of the lockdown, like in several states, the child helpline numbers got several calls. So I would say, the psychosocial side of things really spurted. The second, I would say, is around, over the course of the lockdown, like just because of migration or other reasons, dropouts, the shift from private schools to government school enrollments given the fee. And clearly, as a trend going forward, I would say the dropout of education or from school for girls is already being seen across the board. And the third, I would say, on learning. I mean, obviously, learning stopped. But I mean, those were the three things from an NGO perspective. Yes, everybody, tried to muscle up what they had, going into communities, trying to get worksheets, workbooks, trying to create a digital way, getting online education. I would say the first 2 months was a little bit of here and now, let's just do what we can do, and then like step back and say how much is required, what can we do. But I would say the fear of funding dropping for the NGOs was very real. The need to diversify beyond education and get into food delivery, emergency delivery, whatever was required. I think that was very apparent. And I think it's remarkable how the NGOs pivoted overnight, worked with the government, worked with others. I think the differentiation between this is an education NGO, a health NGO, an emergency-based NGO, I mean, all that went away. So I do think the sector came together very well. I mean, of course, we could have done a lot more. But let me just pause there and would love to hear Anurag's perspective on this.
Good evening. Actually, when the lockdown happened, for the first, let's say, 3 months, education or schools were totally unimportant, irrelevant. And, in a country the size of India, let me speak for 90% of the kids, not 10% of the kids, so 90% of the kids. School education was an irrelevant thing because the kind of devastation that they were going through, upheaval that they were going through, it was so unprecedented and so fundamental in their lives that these things mattered little. If you don't know where the food is going to come from tonight or tomorrow, this stuff doesn't matter, right? And I have, in some senses, dedicated my life to school education. And I went out publicly saying that let's not worry about education. because that was the state of affairs. So I think we need to recognize that that really was a deeply traumatic period. And like I said, in a country the size of India, it had varying degrees of effect. But for 90% of the country, this was true. So that's one. Two is that, let's say if you come to, let's say June, July, right? July, I would say. Uh, you know, there is no real economic revival in July, August, right? So you still have a problem. It is not as severe as April, May, June, but you still have a problem through July, August, September. It continues even now, but July, August, September. But then again, the varying effects you can see, and which is that you had segments of population where the children continued to help their parents earn money. Uh, you had segments of population where children were out back playing, because schools were closed. And, you had segments of population where the kids were, uh, you know, let's say trying to do stuff which was to do with education. That's a very small percentage, actually, right? And by the way, before we go forward sometime in the conversation, online education didn't work. It doesn't work. That's hope, and I think that's to my mind one of the great benefits, that it's demonstrated in a 4-month period that online education doesn't work. So let's keep it aside. So that's, let's say, period two, or effect period two and effect two. Period three, which is what we are going through, and what we'll go through in January, February, March, April. We don't know the exact effects, and those effects are of two kinds. One, what kind of children will actually drop out? We don't know that. We are right now guessing, right? We are all guessing what kind of children will drop out, what percentage will it be. And my submission to everybody in education is, we are not going to wait to discover who's going to drop out. We have to do everything in our powers to make sure that kids don't drop out, right? So it's contingent upon us. It's obligatory upon us that we actually go out and make sure that kids don't drop out. So that's one part. The other part, which is going to happen, is inevitable, but we don't have a good sense of it, is what is the kind of, let me just use a word which I won't use otherwise, just to communicate it simply. What is the kind of academic regression one would see? What do I mean by academic regression? We know anecdotally, we have launched a research project, and we should know better in, let's say, a couple of months' time. But kids in grade 3, they've forgotten to read and write because they've not been in school for a year. Kids in grade 6, what have they forgotten about math and language or social sciences from grade 5, right? There is academic regression, what I'm calling academic regression. How much is it? What categories of students are hurt more? We don't know. And therefore, what we don't know is what is it that needs to be done as schools open up. What we know is what should not be done. What should not be done is we cannot pick up life from where we left. We have to figure out what's happened to the kids. We have to pay special attention, and we'll have to have a period where we actually support kids to come back. It won't be exactly the same, but come back to a certain level, right? So those are three kinds of effects, which is first 3-4 months, absolute devastation. The next few months, some semblance of return, not to normalcy, but to stability. And now the prospect of dropping out, which we must stop, and the sure regression, which we must deal with.
Thanks, Anurag. Anurag, every time I've heard you speak, you've made one very bold statement. And today's, I think your bold statement of the day today has been that online education doesn't work. I want you to spend a little time explaining why you say that, and I want to hear Geeta's views on that as well. We've heard various speakers until now talking about the benefits of online education, and also students talking about how they've been able to stay in touch with their teachers and their classrooms through their mobile devices. But I'm going to stop myself from talking more and hear from you, your point of view, and then have Geeta either agree or disagree. I don't know where she stands on this.
Actually, Gayatri, this is not a matter of point of view. Uh, if you look at, and there's a host of research on this now, host of research for the past 6 months. So you'll see what small percentage of kids have access to devices, to the net, to get through to online education. So first of all, it's ineffective because kids don't have access.
That's fair. That's fair.
And right, so I mean, let's not, and therefore, picking up in a country of 1.3 billion people, we can always pick up 500,000 kids who would benefit from online education in some way, right? So let's not get lost, right? So one is the issue of access, which everybody knows and everybody is familiar with. And it's surprising as to, despite the fact that when people know that of the 270 to 80 million kids, 220, 30 million kids have no access, why would people think of online education as any kind of a default option, right? Why is it talked about at all, right? So one is the issue of access. The second issue, which is a far more fundamental issue, is the nature of education. Education is the idea of reaching curricular goals, right, which are preset, and that the nature of education requires a very intimate social interaction between the child and the teacher. Because if you are a teacher, and I'm guessing many of you might be, holding the attention of the child is the first thing. Taking her step by step towards the curricular goal, many back and forth that happens, is the second thing. This doesn't happen online, right? Even if you have wonderful access. Forget about our situation where you have no access. So online education is ineffective, period, for kids. Leave aside adults. We run a university, so I'm also familiar as to what limitations does it have with adults, right? So, it's a puzzling thing as to why would people just want to go again and again to the idea of online education. Now, that doesn't mean that online resources can't be used. That doesn't mean, in your statement I saw, it doesn't mean that WhatsApp or a video call like this is not a good thing to keep in touch with people. Of course it is, right? But the notion of online education, that you can convert education to something online like this, a teacher and 30 kids, it doesn't work, right? And which is why if you look at states, state after state after state, after the initial enthusiasm in April, May, or not April, but May and June, they have all retreated. If you want, you can look at the study that we have published 4 weeks ago, which is about this matter, which doesn't deliberately, we did not focus on the matter of access, because enough has been said about access. It focuses on the matter of education, right? So that's it. And by the way,
Yeah.
you have to remember. That we, as a foundation, we own 66% of one of the largest tech companies in the world. So we are naturally inclined to say tech is good, right?
Which is
So
why I
when we
said
say
bold
something, there has to
statement.
be some source credibility. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think only online, is only online the best choice for education? No, I mean, that I agree. But just, saying that, technology is good. I mean, I also agree with that statement. Technology is a great enabler. Definitely agree. Can technology help improve the quality of education that is delivered in our offline classrooms? Again, agree. So I would say I don't want to write off online education. I would say it continues to be a great enabler. Yes, we were in unprecedented times when offline education was not possible, and therefore, keeping again the access issue aside, does it, what can online channels allow for students to, bring some structure in a day, keep 2 hours of practice sheets, all of that? Yes, if you can solve the access issues, those are great. In some of our states where we work in Himachal Pradesh, we actually saw like 80-90% engagement from the students who had access. Himachal does have a high penetration, that was 50-60%. But yes, parents start going back to work, the phone is not at home. So I'm just saying access is a big issue. Uh, can, can we use technology like phones, IVRS, calling? These are all good steps towards it. Can it replace a school education? No. And so, I mean, I completely agree. A school education is not just about academics; it's about the social interaction, and it's almost like, would we shift to a work from home atmosphere because this experiment has been successful, or not successful? I mean, I still feel, there is a need to go into offices for people to interact. I mean, product. So by the same means, I would say we were actually surprised by both the engagement on online education, the assessments on online education. In some of the states, we work in Himachal, very high, both high penetration, high engagement. We work in Rajasthan, low penetration, low engagement. What were the reasons for it? I mean, several reasons, including maybe, the status of the families, the students, etc., but also the push and the motivation from the teachers, and the whole education department in pushing it through. Can we sustain only online education for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? Again, no. So I would say what it has brought to light are two things. One, of course, the digital access is a big issue. But two, in my view, I think the governments and the state departments have actually broadened their mindset on technology. And therefore, can we use it for blended learning when kids are back in school? Possibly, yes. I mean, I would say we should not shift back into saying, no technology in schools or limited technology. If we have the budgets, we should encourage, practice learning through technology, because we do have limitations in our schools in terms of how much time the teachers can spend on it. So yes, I do in some ways would say present the opposite view from Anurag. But at a baseline, I mean, completely agree. Only online education doesn't work, but it's a great enabler, and I don't think we should discount it.
I had a feeling you'd have an opposite view, and that's why I thought I'd be a little provocative here. Um, Moving back to the crisis itself, I would love to hear, and Anurag, maybe you can start, like, what has the foundation done that it hasn't done before in order to respond to the crisis?
Um, so between 1st of April and 15th of May, in that 45-day period, uh, we basically mobilized, let's call it a ground level team, grassroots team of about 65,000 people across 400 districts. And these 65,000 people were, we have my own team members, about 1,700 of them. Then about, let's say, roughly 55 odd thousand of our partners' employees, a couple of thousand of our university alumni, and the rest of them are government school teachers whom we work with ordinarily, right, in other stuff. So roughly 65,000 odd people on the ground across 400 districts. And that really became, it was by far the most important thing, because then we set up supply chains for essentially basic necessities, right, food and stuff like that. And that's how we were able to, let's say, deliver basic humanitarian aid across these districts. And that went on. That went on from April 1 to, at the same pace, I would say, to middle of July, end of July. It continued a bit after that, but not as much. What it transitioned to after that is, how do we support regeneration of livelihoods? And there we focused on, small and marginal farmers in rain-fed areas. So, India is a huge country. We can't even hope to tackle a small percentage of it. You have to focus somewhere. So we focused on helping regenerate livelihoods of small and marginal farmers. And we focused significantly on helping rural populations access MNREGA. Right? That was a big thing, because MNREGA really was the lifeline, or continues to be the lifeline, not was, is continuing to be the lifeline in rural areas. So that is the second thing that we did. The other track of what we were doing was, of course, and we are not a healthcare organization. We had never worked in healthcare before. The NGOs that we fund, we don't fund in healthcare. So this was new, but it was very clear to us that if we had to do something, we also had to contribute as much as we could on healthcare. And therefore, we worked with the various state governments on tackling the pandemic. And that included starting from community mobilization, community awareness, uh, testing, setting up testing capacity, RT-PCR machines, TrueNAT machines, of course, tertiary and secondary care, and integrated healthcare response in collaboration with the state governments wherever we were operating. And that, of course, continues even now because it's clear that we'll have to go at it till the pandemic is there, perhaps for the next 12 to 18 months. So that's the second track. And the third track, of course, was that we were deeply involved along with the government school teachers in trying to work with children. And online education, as I said, doesn't work. And what really worked was uh, in some states, eventually it happened systematically. In some other states, it was not systematic, but where it happened systematically essentially was the idea of neighborhood classes. So if you think of a teacher and going to a village and collecting the kids who are there, 10 kids, and teaching them for a 4-hour period, what was happening is that you see the kids are in that neighborhood. Getting them together is not increasing the risk of infection by any even small degree, right? And you hold the classes in the open. And so Karnataka did a damn good job of this. Chhattisgarh tried it. Rajasthan did it in its own way. So some states did it very systematically, some states less systematically. But that is the third big part of the effort. That, of course, continues. And actually, at this particular moment, what we're really on the ground at is what I was mentioning earlier. We are trying to figure out what is going to happen with kids on the dropout side and what I was calling the academic regression, because I think that is going to be the key challenge over the next 6 to 8 months.
Absolutely. There's a massive pivot from your everyday job otherwise. So this is, I guess it is a time where you just do whatever is required on the ground. Geeta,
Yeah.
I know you've done some interesting work at the foundation as well in response to COVID. Would
Yeah.
love to hear about it.
Yeah, I must say, I think compared to Anurag's 1,500 powerful team, we have a 20-member power team. So yes, so I think initially the response was more in terms of like funding organizations like Hak Darshak, like LaborNet, which were doing some on the ground either humanitarian aid or they were trying to enable cash transfers from the government. So just those linkages of government benefits being readily available to the end beneficiaries. And today we work with Jan Sahas, we work with Ajivika. So I would say entitlements, cash transfers as one. In the initial month, like a very few support to organizations on just last mile food delivery, etc. Uh, then I would say more as the lockdown began to open was saying how do we get more and more micro entrepreneurs, self-employed, the gig workers back on track. And really, again, what we've done in the past is financial inclusion. So we went back to it and said, how do we unlock more credit for the micro enterprises, through direct debt guarantees, pushing more segments. So yes, I would say a whole lot of work on MSME and gig worker financing, even for a lot of these gig workers which were on platforms like Uber, Ola, Urban Company. They'd gone back to the village, and in order to come back, they needed like just a guarantee that at least they'll get 20,000, 25,000 upfront when they come back because they'd left their houses, they needed rent deposits. Like, I mean, just the whole thing of coming back from the village to the city and some certainty that I have cash in the bank account. So yes, I mean, differently structured ways of supporting gig and micro enterprises on the livelihood side. The third, and again, this was something we were doing, but I think just pushed up the focus a lot more, is enabling livelihood platforms which were doing job matching, so hyper local job matching, because again there was a big shift of the population, big shift of sectors So we do support a company called WorkX, which matches more and more platforms, more and more jobs in a sector specific, zone specific, pin code specific way, and then also work with the government in Haryana to push out the Rozgar portal. So I think matching would be one big area on livelihoods. Coming to education, as I said, we were already working in 3 states. Here in the first 2 weeks, yes, I mean, all the states were able to, push out WhatsApp groups, get the teachers and the parents onto one group, push within 3 weeks, I would say, started pushing out daily content, grade, subject specific, 2 hours, and the teachers calling up the students on a weekly basis. And I would say, I mean, the feedback we've got from the field, at least where it worked, was, more than anything else, it brought about some structure and stability in the children's life. So 10 to 12, maybe 3, 4 of them would get together, share a phone. But I think it just brought back some level of normalcy. And then, I mean, as the lockdown opened, I would say, the focus was how do we get more workbooks. So again, on the offline side, first ensuring books reach the students, then ensuring you have workbooks and practice sheets that can reach the students, finding ways of hybrid learning. I think, again, we did a few experiments of community teaching in some of the states. I would say, not as structured a way as it can be done, because it was almost always, in 2 months the school will open, in 1 month the school will open. I mean, it was just like pushing out the timelines like that. uh, but uh, but yeah, I mean, in terms of dropouts, what we are seeing, I was just looking at the Rajasthan data. I mean, this year in grade one, the enrollments are 35% less than last year. Because, I mean, so it's not a dropout, but it's like kids haven't enrolled. I mean, I was seeing grade 10, 12, which are the senior grades, there has actually been almost a 35 to 40% increase in government school enrollment. So these are kids because these are board classes, so parents are more serious. So they've shifted from private to government. I mean, maybe in some of the other classes, we are not seeing these movements because nobody's bothered yet. I mean, the school year hasn't started, so they haven't started shifting. So I mean, definitely don't know what the scale of the dropout will be. But I think just looking at grade one enrollment, I would say is scary. Uh, you know, which grades it drops more, which states, which regions, which gender. I mean, a lot to be seen on that front.
Great. We have a question from one of our audience members, Shweta Chari, and it was also a question I was going to ask you. So, what next? What does 2021 look like? And her question that she's added to what I was thinking was, what are lessons that we've learned that, so that we don't make the same mistakes again as a country in 2021 and going forward? Geeta, do you want to continue? And then Anurag can go after you.
Yeah, sure. Uh, so I think what mistakes, I mean, they just span across the board from health, livelihoods. I mean, let me just focus on education because I guess that was more the topic for your panel. I mean, we can go into a little bit of health. But really, what is it we've learned? I would say one thing which was clear to us, again, from our work in the States, was that where the state department and the teachers were already focusing on learning outcomes, the engagement was much higher versus states where the focus still was on infrastructure, attendance, access, etc. So I think galvanizing a team that was already on, I mean, I think the motivation levels were definitely higher when they were focused on learning outcomes. Going forward, what we are trying to do is with each of the states, actually trying to design, some kind of hybrid models, recognizing that we will not be back to fully operational offline schools. The hybrid could be in school, workbooks at home, community, and I would also say online. And again, simple WhatsApp based, but some access to online. Either community center sharing. I mean, trying to figure out those ways. And I would say not yet. I mean, the states are not ready to still engage in those discussions. But I do think this has again brought back to light the need for holistic development, the need for integrating life skills into the curriculums, which wasn't really being done in a structured way. Uh, and I mean, sorry, just going back to what we did, I would also say, schools are not just education. For most children, it's the midday meals, it's the whole safety piece. So I think in the first month, even organizing how the quotas for midday meals, the rations would reach the homes of students, that was there. And as we think about these hybrid models, I think those are some of the things still trying to plan. But yes, one is planning in fairly unplanned ways, or unpredictable ways. But I would say, I think continuing with hybrid models of learning, some inclusion of technology-based models as well, is one thing. And yeah, let me not get into the whole livelihoods and health side, because I know we are also running out of time.
Sure. Anurag, would love to hear your thoughts on what does the next year look like?
We don't know. I don't think anybody knows. What we know is what the issues will be, which I have already talked about.
Right.
In education, the issues are making sure that kids don't drop out. And the second one, it's not being paid enough attention to, which I've been mentioning, the academic regression. This is going to be very complex because we don't know what the academic regression will be. We don't know how much is required. We don't know what is then the effect of it on the syllabus. We don't know what, therefore, there is the effect on sessions. We don't know how are we going to treat this in the context of kids who are leaving school in the sense not dropping out, who are passing 10th, passing 12th, right? So what we know is this is the most serious issue that will face us. And we do not have a good enough, forget about a plan, a good enough at this moment, even approach mentally on this matter, right? So that's one part. The question also had what mistakes have we made, right?
Yeah.
And we made too many mistakes in the short term to recount them here. Just too many mistakes. So let's not talk about that.
Sure.
I think the most important thing that the past 9 months has told us, if it needed telling, right? I don't think it needed telling, but it's told us in the most amplified way possible, is that this stuff is structural in our society and country. We cannot address this by saying, let's do this here and let's do that there. Our public health system is broken. We've got to fix it. Our public education does not have adequate investment. We have to make that happen. We do not have social security, even basic social security for our citizens. We must have it. So if we continue to even only think about what I would call as either symptoms or superficial issues, we will remain where we are. So it's not that we needed a wake-up call. It's not that we needed a magnifying glass, but the pandemic has been a magnifying glass. Better look at it and better fix what really needs to be fixed.
Thank you for that. And thank you both, Anurag and Geeta, for not just spending your time, but sharing so openly both mistakes, your points of view, and also learnings that you've had 10 months. I was in a webinar a few days ago where someone said, as foundations, it's not just our duty and responsibility to be able to serve at this point, but it's actually a privilege that we're able to do the work that we do. Just a huge thank you and apologies to the various people who've sent questions in. We don't actually have time to answer all of them, but I'm sure you'll get your answers on other forums where Geeta and Anurag are speaking. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Gayatri.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Anurag.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.